The students that were employed prior to entering the program, they all, 243% of them received a wage increase after completion of the program. So some of them may have received more than one at each step of their completion. That's why that number seems a little off. The Sunpath Initiative incorporated integrated basic education into our healthcare program. That enabled students working on their high school equivalency to obtain training in an allied health field and gain employment upon the completion. The students that participated in IDAS is what we called it. They earned their certificate in their respective program, gained an industry-recognized credential, and received their high school equivalency within a calendar year, which accelerated all of these students into high-demand career occupations or advancement to college-level courses to pursue their degree. We also developed great working relationships with employers like Tri-Port Laboratories. They came in, made classroom visits, spoke with our students about professionalism, job expectations, and career advancement opportunities within their organization, and from the assisted living facilities and other organizations as well. Thank you.
Could you, do you mind giving us your name and?
Sure, Eileen Davis, UNM-Taos.
We have a question for you. Here, Representative Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that report. Now, after the certificates of the students receiving their equivalency, their high school equivalency, and their certificates, is the program too new to know this statistic, but do you think there's a percentage of them that might go on to an associate's degree or something else? Or is it too new to tell?
Well, during that time frame, we had, I'd say 20% of them went on to, that received their high school equivalency, went into college level courses and pursued their, working towards their associate's degree.
Great, okay. Well, thanks for that update on the program.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr.
Oh, sorry.
Don't go away.
There's a disadvantage to being the only one who's here for public comment. The disadvantage is, my question is, Sunpath grant is new to me. Did I understand that the grant is now ended and you're here thanking us for something that's over?
I think they're on the agenda at the 2 o'clock session, seeking additional resources. But the grant has ended.
That's what I was going to ask. And thank you for reminding me that we're going to hear more about it in a minute. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you very much, Elaine. And Senator Rodriguez, we would look to have you introduce yourself to the webcast audience out there.
Oh, thank you, Mr.
There
Chair.
must be a mic. Is there a mic down there?
Here we've got a mic for the senator.
We only have two.
Oh, there he's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is good. I'm Nancy, Senator Nancy Rodriguez. I'm from Santa Fe, and I thank everyone for being here today, and of course, UNM for the hospitality.
Thank you, Nancy.
It's your pass back.
We just leave it on. I think that was just. All right, we'll move on then to our panel. And
We have one more comment, if that's okay.
oh, you want to make a comment before the panel? You're on the panel. Then come on up and make a comment first. Come on up, panel.
Don't be shy. Me.
Oh, somebody else wants to make a comment. Please introduce yourself and make your comment.
Can I sit down and speak into the mic, Mason?
Please. It's being webcast, and there are thousands of people listening.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Harrington, and I'm a member of the Comanche Tribe of Oklahoma. Thank you. I was in the Mexico Gay Men's Choir, and I was always having to fiddle with the microphone, so because I'm usually the tallest one. So let me repeat myself. My name is Christopher Harrington, and I'm a member of the Comanche Tribe of Oklahoma. I am currently the Department Chair of Liberal Arts and Business Education at the Southwest Community Polytechnic Institute, and also the acting Department Chair for Adult Basic Ed. So I'm here to speak on behalf of SIPI, and we would like to voice our support for SIPI to be onboarded for the SunPath initiative. Because I know tribal colleges were excluded in the original SunPath initiative, and so again, I'm here to represent SIPI and to let you know that we have the capacity. We currently have the WIOA grant through the state, through the adult basic education programs. We have numerous degree and certificate programs, and our campus is there in Albuquerque. So again, I'm here to voice our support for SIPI and other tribal colleges to become part of the SunPath initiative.
Thank you very much. Can you give us your name, Chris?
Christopher Harris.
Christopher Harris. Thank you very much. Okay, now to find out even more about SunPath, we will have a panel. And the panel is made up of Pamela Blackwell, Senior Policy Director of New Mexico First, Kristen Krell, Academic Career Education Manager, and the former Executive Director of SunPath at Santa Fe Community College, Waldy Salazar for Workforce Solutions Department, and Melissa Oppenheim, Director of the School of Nursing here at UNM-Taos, and she's the area coordinator for the UNM Health Sciences Center. So are you going to be the starting speaker, Pamela?
Yes.
Well, welcome.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to present on the SunPath program today. Thank you to our public commenters for a really nice warm-up. What I'd like to do is start out with telling you how New Mexico First came to support this SunPath program. SunPath program came about through our Higher Education 2018 Higher Education Town Hall, of which some of you actually probably participated in it. New Mexico First, for those of you who aren't familiar, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We do research. We facilitate people from divergent and diverse points of view from all around the state to come to consensus on some really tough solutions on education, healthcare, economy, natural resources, as well as good governance. And then we take these recommendations that our residents have come together on, and we help to advocate for them, whether it's in a policy change in the public or in the private sector. So for this town hall, we really have the honor of speaking on behalf of over 200 New Mexicans that agreed that the SunPath program was a way to improve our workforce, and particularly our healthcare workforce. Three of the big themes that came out of the higher education town hall that relate to all the areas in which SunPath addresses have to do with student success. So the participants called for the need to have really wraparound services for students, following students all the way from high school through post-secondary education, community college, 4-year certificates, and then beyond straight into the workforce to have more streamlined and fewer gaps there. Also more alignment with the workforce and really taking advantage of the fact that healthcare is really one of our most promising industries. There are a lot of in-demand careers there, as you all know. And then also on governance. Speaking to, we're in one of our higher education institutions here, and there have been calls for more efficiency, more collaboration among higher education institutions as well, for efficiency, but also for the student experience. So as we know, our post-secondary students face a lot of challenges. Almost 40% of our students have to go into remediation. 28% of them don't really get through to their sophomore year. So in the meantime, they have been spending their money, their scholarship money, whatever funds they can to get educations that they may not indeed get, or that might not actually match up with jobs out there. And in the meantime, our students more and more look like, even our quote-unquote traditional students, look like our adult students as well. They are serving, they are trying to support families, children, elders, holding 1 to 2 jobs. So making education relevant to them and that investment is getting harder and harder. Then we also spoke to employers, of course. Healthcare employers, they are in need of a skilled workforce. So people who have the real training and skills to do all of these different types of positions and jobs, but as well as the soft skills as well. And spoke to governments there. And then we also had a separate track on the healthcare workforce. And the calls for that were, from our participants, were for more and better financed healthcare career pathway systems. That's a real key word in this program. And partnerships as well. And then also more entry-level healthcare certificates. So from that, we looked into SunPath further, and this was one of the recommendations that received over 85% support from our participants. So that gave us the allowance to come and present this really wonderful program to you. The program, Representative Anderson pointed out, started out as a federal grant program from the U.S. Department of Labor. It was $15 million over 4 years. That program sunset in September 2018. And I'll talk about the legislation we brought, but that timing made it a little bit difficult to inform you all on all that the program had achieved in that time because of the legislative timing and timelines. So what this program does is it breaks down the silos. So SunPath, it's a consortium of New Mexico higher education institutions, 11 community colleges throughout our state, including UNM-Taos, one of the strongest programs, and UNM Valencia is also a real model program as well. And it's a partnership with those schools, Department of Workforce Solutions, Higher Education Department, and over 200 employers throughout our state who have hired these students, actually who are graduates from the program. So all the partners contribute a substantial portion to the SunPath program. The colleges in particular, they have used the funds that state funds they get and other funds, and redirected them towards this program. This program accelerates students through healthcare training programs and directly into the workforce. So over, as of now, and Kristen can correct me, but over 4,200 students have gone through this program, so there's an unprecedented 64% completion rate, and many are still in the program itself, so that number will only rise. That's an unheard of completion rate for any of our higher education institutions. They become employed at a 14% higher rate than their peers, and they're earning close to $8,000 more than the average high school graduate. Once they complete their certificate or grade, the amazing thing is that they're actually continuing on with their credentials and degrees. So once these students who may not have had a good experience in school get that confidence and get the services they need, they're actually continuing on, many on to more full-fledged nursing degree and other degrees. Key components of this are that this program provides student-centered guided career pathways. So you have the wraparound, so you get two counselors. One who helps you figure out your services you can get, childcare services in particular, support services, financial support services, but you also get a job development career coach, which Wally will speak to as well. And that person helps you get through resumes, interviews, soft skills, and a really nice soft handoff directly into a job, so you don't have that gap after the graduation. It also promotes collaboration and efficient governance. So these 11 community colleges actually are sharing their resources. Though the payment formula doesn't necessarily incentivize this kind of sharing, this SunPath program, through the organization of it, has helped to create this environment in which there is efficient use and sharing of resources. It's also a sound education and workforce alignment investment. This program has been measured by a number of folks, including UNM's Bureau of Business and Economic Research, in which every dollar invested in this program produces another over $2 in the New Mexico economy, and that's from UNM Beaver. So overall, this program really does benefit families, communities, the healthcare industry, and the economy, and it really can be applied to others. It can be applied to the energy economy, it can be applied to IT, our K-12 teachers, creating a pipeline. You just change the noun and you move that through. So I can speak to more about the sustainability pilot project legislation that we tried to get through this last session. That obviously can change with feedback from you all and different schools that want to be involved in this program. But at any rate, that's pretty much the overview and why. I would say, but for New Mexico First Town Hall and our involvement, we wouldn't be able to bring this to you today. So we're really trying to keep alive a really promising program and make sure we keep that investment moving forward.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having us today. So my name is Kristen Krell, and I was the consortium director for SunPath. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program and how it worked. But before I do, I don't know if you have this presentation in front of you, I assume that you do. Why is SunPath important for New Mexico? On the next 2 pages, slides 12 and 13, you'll see 2 maps of New Mexico, and I think this sets a really clear stage for why this is important. On the first one on page 12, this is a map. Sorry, this slide. Slide 12 and 13. Slide 12 and 13? Page 6. Sorry, mine is, I printed mine differently. Slide 12 and 13. Page 6.
Yours starts with this.
Okay, excellent. So, thank you. Thank you. So this sets the foundation for why this is important. On slide 12, it's percentage of individuals over 25 years of age with an associate's degree or higher by census tract. So you'll notice the lighter sort of yellow shade is 60 to 79% of the population has an associate's degree or higher. And then as you look across the state, the darker colors show the lower percentage of adults with an associate's degree. So basically, it shows that we are facing low levels of education across the state. And if you compare that to the next slide, which is the per capita income in New Mexico, it shows that we're also, struggling with poverty and low levels of income. And clearly, the two are connected. So the low levels of income, the low levels of education correlate with the low levels of income. And so what we're trying to do is create pathways out of poverty across the state. And this is a model that we replicated from states like Washington State that have had years of success with this, and we experienced success with it as well. So the results, do you want to? Sure.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
On your map of the per capita income, there's a little anomalous figure out there in McKinney County. What is that census tract with the highest levels of income in the state? Either the Zuni Pueblo Jewelers are doing a lot better than you thought they were, or there's nobody but 2 millionaires living in that census tract.
That's an interesting point, and I don't have the answer to that. We got these maps from, you probably remember Peter Winograd would put together maps when he worked for the Center of Education and Policy Research. And I looked at the map, so I don't have a specific answer, but thank you for pointing that out. And that is really fascinating and curious. Pardon me?
Betty was using Zuni lawsuit information and then somehow got mixed up with this stuff.
Interesting. I hadn't noticed that. I will be aware of that, and thank you. That's it.
Go ahead, sir.
Now that we
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so overall the results, you've already heard some of them, but these students are completing their certificate and degrees at a 34% higher rate, and they're employed again at an overall 14% higher rate, and they have a gain in salary as well, compared to their peers who are not in that program. And next,
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So the next slide, I hope we're all on the same pages. Let's see, slide number, it's slide 15. And it's in regards to the healthcare industry and the continued future growth within the economy. And as we all know, that healthcare serves 40% of the growth that's going to take place within the economy by the year 2022. So SunPath definitely aligned with what we know already within healthcare and the services that are required there. Going to the next slide, it ties into the educational requirements within the healthcare occupations. And as you can see that it's going to be about 30% are going to require a post-secondary non-degree award, which aligned quite well with what we were doing within SunPath, which was certificate granting and associate degree level programs of study within CNA, phlebotomy, EMT, pharmacy tech, and the list goes on and on. But this definitely illustrates and emphasizes the importance of what we're doing and what we've been doing within SunPath throughout the consortium. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I did speak more to the, I'm not going to repeat myself, on return on the investment. Again, this is contributing more to the economy, it's getting people jobs and in-demand careers. So it's helping the families, it's helping create access. Also the idea in this is, while it has been a struggle and continues to be a struggle to keep all of our levels of providers in our communities, this is also a way in which higher level providers can be persuaded to stay in communities or go to those communities to work, because there is not as much of a burden on them as there would be should you not have these allied health providers there.
So the primary goals, and I like to state these because they're really clear goals, and it really was our driving purpose that's behind everything we're doing. And one of the reasons why I think SunPath worked well is because we were very clear about the purpose, and everyone working on it was able to communicate these goals clearly and strive for them. So first, to expand the capacity and systemic improvements in the delivery of healthcare career pathways with a focus on aligning with industry needs. So we started with 13 employers when we wrote the proposal and ended up with 200 active employer partners. So we're really focused on meeting their needs. Increase the attainment of degrees, certifications, and industry-recognized credentials. So I do want to say, one of the reasons why I think we came out with a positive return on investment in the Beaver study is because there was an emphasis in getting adults into these entry-level credentials, where within a semester or two, they can actually complete a certificate that will lead to a job. And then the idea from there is that it's a pathway and they can continue on while they enter into these entry-level jobs in healthcare. And that, as what the Beaver study found, is that an individual is worth $7,000 to $10,000 a year more just with that entry-level credential. So that was one of the foundations of the return on investment. Create strategic alignment between education and workforce systems, resulting in improved employment outcomes, retention, and average earnings. And as the director, it was pretty eye-opening to see just how fragmented our systems actually are. So we have this really tremendous workforce system that's very well resourced, working separately from our higher education system that's very good at training people, but the two were functioning in isolation as opposed to being aligned, where people come out of the training programs and then they access the workforce system to prepare to enter into employment and then get placed into a job that is looking to hire. And so that alignment was really one of the huge successes from my perspective. SunPath partners, so Santa Fe Community College was the lead on the first round and is prepared to be the lead on the next round. We have a new college president. I met with her this morning and she gave me the go-ahead to say that. 10 community colleges were involved in addition to Santa Fe Community College. Over 200 employer partners across the state. The Department of Workforce Solutions is a very active, close partner. And then also the Higher Education Department. And you can see page, your page 10, across the state, the colleges that were involved. So. And then the SunPath program design. I actually have a paper on this. If anybody wants more information, we can send it to you. But the way that it works is foundational and so critical is the stacked credential model. So for example, at Santa Fe Community College, we've been working on stacking the certified nursing assistant credential within the medical assisting associate's degree. So there'll be the CNA, certified nursing assistant, then the phlebotomy, these are industry recognized credentials, and those credits stack and embed within then the medical assisting degree. So students who come to us without a high school equivalency, within a year, if all goes as planned, they can have those entry-level credentials, they can continue working. Within a year, they have to get their high school equivalency and then continue on. So it's those stacked credentials that are really foundational. And then iVest is a model that's we replicated from Washington State, and it's basically 2 instructors in the classroom, and the idea is that adults come to us, they might have low levels of math and literacy skills because they don't have their high school equivalency. There's over 200,000 adults in New Mexico without a high school credential. And this part of this program does target that population. Gets them in, and then we have an instructor that's skilled at building math and literacy skills, and they partner with the content instructor, the certified nursing assistant, for example, or phlebotomy or EMT, whatever the college decides, along with the team, is the priority. So that way, they're learning math and literacy skills that are contextualized to their program of study, so it becomes relevant, and then within a year, they can get that credential. So that's the iVest model. It's in every college in Washington State, and my hope is that this can be a catalyst for New Mexico to do this well, because it is best practice. And there's no reason why we can't succeed with this. And then the job development career coaches, Wally will tell you more about it, but it's having the workforce employee on campus working very closely to prepare these students for employment upon completion. We'll tell you more about that. The collaboration among colleges, we were literally meeting twice a month for years to share curriculum, to share best practices, to share resources, simulation centers, cross-training, so that was tremendous. And then the whole idea is wrapped around the sector strategies. So identifying the high-demand industry sectors, bringing those employers to the table, listening to their needs, getting the workforce data on where the job demand is, and then really creating statewide and regional career pathway aligning teams focused on meeting those employment needs. And that involved a collaboration with the Department of Workforce Solutions and active employer engagement.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'm Melissa Offenhartz. I'm the nursing program director here at UNM-Taos. Thank you so much for having us here today. I just want to speak a little bit about some of the examples of the stacked credentials in these healthcare career pathways. There's a lot of information on this slide. When I look at this, really what I see are our students who are able to first and foremost engage with a higher educational system that perhaps they had never really thought about getting into or have had past traumatic experiences with education. But knowing that the entry point in these career pathways and these stacked credentials will actually allow them to obtain an industry recognized credential that they are able to then move into the educational system and then out into employment because of our partnerships, our close partnerships with both the Department of Workforce Solutions, with our job development career coaches, and then also having established strong relationships with employers in our region who tell us what it is they need the educational system to provide in order to have students graduating from these programs that are able to seamlessly step into jobs. We know the reality of the situation for our students is that they need to continue working. Our goal is to get them in, give them a great educational experience, while providing them with this industry recognized credentials so that they are able to move into and out of the workforce, continue to support their families, and the credits that they're earning in these entry-level certificate programs count towards a higher level degree. So while they're working as a nursing assistant or an EMT basic or a community health worker, gaining experience, building their resume, they are now able to come back into the educational system and attain another certificate and eventually an associate's degree. And many of these also integrate into upper division courses so that eventually they can earn their bachelor's degree. So the whole idea is really to get students into higher education, give them the support and resources and wraparound services that they need, which then allows them to go into the workforce and then back into the programs without losing credits, and having all of those credits count towards the attainment of higher level degrees, which is really ultimately what we would like to see. And so there are several examples on this slide looking at, for example, the emergency medical technician. The entry-level certification is an EMT basic. Students earn that degree, are working on the ambulance in the emergency room at the hospital, and then can come back in at a later time. Sometimes the employers will even cover part of the education for attaining higher level certifications. They can go to earn their advanced EMT. At UNM-Taos, for example, through the SunPath program, we were able to create an emergency medical services associate degree. We started community health worker. We had a CNA program, but it became much more robust and vibrant as a result of participating in the SunPath program. And then the EMS associate's degree articulates with the paramedic degree at main campus, and so students are able, they don't use any credits, and they're able to get those higher degrees. And there are other examples of that as well. Kristen talked about the integrated basic education skills training, or IBEST model. We know from adult learning theory that, as we've said before, most of our students are non-traditional. So these are adults who are entering into the educational system, and adults are very pragmatic. They don't want to be in school learning things that don't seem relevant to their lives. And so these programs really are, the contextualized education provides them with support for reading and writing and math skills while they're learning a skill that's marketable and that they know they're going to get a job. So it makes sense to them that this education, while they're strengthening those basic skills, they're actually learning a job where they're learning a skill where they're able to get a job after they complete the program.
So I think we've spoken enough about the IBEST, Integrated Basic Education. It is the on-ramp support system for underprepared adults to enter into a career pathway. And it is slide 22. I'm happy to answer that.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, again, I failed to introduce myself earlier. My name is Walter Salazar. I'm with the Department of Workforce Solutions, and I served as the manager who supervised and worked closely with the consortium and the job development career coaches through the 4-year grant. So I want to share a little bit more about our role and our partnership with the colleges and how that all came about. But it was through the grant, and we brought on myself, and I want to say there was about 18 staff members that we were able to hire on to work hand in hand at each one of the colleges within the consortium. And for us, that was instrumental to have an opportunity to have an office space that was provided by the college, and to have one of our job development career coaches housed, working closely with their team of advisors and academic professionals in getting our graduates ready for the workforce. So that was our key role, but we also played a key role in bringing in employers. As we mentioned, we had about 200 employers that were part of this consortium through the beginning, which is important because we wanted to bring them in to identify what their needs were within their ideal candidates. So they were integral in part of designing curriculum, sharing their input on, what they would really like to see from the colleges. And then what was really exciting as well is they not only did that, but they came in and spoke to students within the classrooms. They talked to them about their careers within their particular organizations. They participated in mock interviews with our students while they were going through the program, as our job development career coaches worked with them on building a resume, worked with them on the soft skills side of the house, but also registered them into our online system within the Department of Workforce Solutions. That system in itself offers a volume of information and resources in regards to employment and how they can capture that, but we were able to get them into the system and allow them to utilize that ongoing, which I thought was very instrumental as well. So as I mentioned on slide 24, the job development career coach's role was to work hand in hand with students and to identify where they wanted to go upon completion of a certificate and or an associate's degree. So we built resumes, we developed resumes, we talked again the soft skills and what was important in regards to that, and we organized job fairs within their communities and worked closely with the career services departments within the colleges, and at the end of the day we connected employers with job seekers, and we were allowed to, I want to say at this point, hire on or gain employment for these students in the number of about 3,100 at this point, and that number is probably increasing from the consortium itself in the colleges. Going on to slide 25, the role of the employer. We've already talked quite a bit about their role and how important it was to get them engaged from the beginning of this initiative, and the role of the workforce and working closely with our college partners. But our employers, again, they were at every meeting statewide and within their sector, within their region. May have been in Wake County, may have been in Valencia, Taos, Farmington, what have you, Gallup. They were at the table sharing their insight in regards to what they wanted to see in regards to the outcomes within the programs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they hired many of these students and continue to look forward to hiring as we move on and go forth with SunPath. So workforce role was one that we continue to see growing with our community college partners. We still have some job development career coaches housed in some of the colleges. UNM Valencia, who was up earlier, we still have a staff member there that's working hand in hand with their program and with their students. So we want to continue that relationship with the colleges, and we want to continue building this SunPath initiative. So thank you.
Yeah, so just sort of to wrap up this piece of it, now that the funds are no longer, in place, it's been really interesting to see what has taken place, and it definitely, there are concerns. I mean, we like to think that you invest all this money and then it sustains, but we've come to realize that without the support that allows for alignment and coordination, that it becomes fragmented because there's turnover in staff, and then so-and-so now reports to so-and-so, and there isn't a clear vision that's focused. SunPath allowed for a very clear vision and goals, and then an alignment of efforts. And so I would say within 6 months, what I've seen at my college, which is Santa Fe Community College, is now all of the pieces start to go separate ways. And it's just one of those things that happen. And it's been, it's been challenging, I won't deny that. So I do think there is a need for a coordinated, supported, funded effort to align these pieces. And a career pathway system is something that is, exists across the country and other states as well. So.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so as you can see, the SunPath program really does tick so many of the boxes of the conversations that I believe you all have had over the years. I think I've had some of these conversations even with you about engaging the community colleges, efficient leveraging of resources, statewide collaboration. but also student success and career-centered programming that means success all the way through, not just getting to school, but getting all the way through to careers. And then, as Melissa was saying, cycling in and cycling out as they would like to, and making that, reducing those barriers. So thanks to the leadership of Representative Thompson and Representative Kelly Fajardo, we were able to bring about legislation this past session that would be appropriations for 8 of the 11 community colleges. We tried for 11 plus all the rest. We're advised to pare down, so that was what our legislation was. That doesn't mean we wouldn't go back for more, as schools like SIPI, for example, would very much like to be a part of this program. And so the coordination we would see as continuing at Santa Fe Community College, and their president has agreed to that. And this would sustain and expand current consortium funding in additional community colleges. And again, I'd just like to reiterate, it is actually a model for other industries as well. So with that, I stand in our panel. Oh, sorry.
Just on that last, on the legislation that was introduced, how much were you asking for and what happened to it?
We asked for, and you'll find kind of a summary of that in this kind of two-page / one-page summary. So we requested $5 million total for 8 colleges that lasted over 4 years. So when you break down that $5 million for 8 colleges over 4 years for all of that, plus the contributions of Department of Workforce Solutions and the amount that the schools provide, it actually is quite a quite smaller investment. So it's not asking for that $15 million all over again. All that base is there. So again, 5 over 4 years for 8 of the schools.
So it was like $1.3 million for each year?
Correct. Correct. And some schools were slightly larger than others. So we did a full, and Kristen has this almost memorized, a full breakdown, what it would be for each and every school and what those different positions would be.
And the Workforce Solutions, job coaches, were they donated in kind? You can carry those on your budget, your existing budget?
So if this were to come through, part of it would absolutely be to fund the job development career coach piece, but all of these are leveraged. So the way we put together our budget is a DWS, Department of Workforce Solutions, would pay for half of that amount, and we've talked in detail, but then we would need funding to pay for the other half. You know, it is a new effort. It's above and beyond what they currently do, and it allows for the alignment and the focus for this purpose.
I mean, no, that's exactly the case. We were going to share the funding with the grant and then in-kind dollars to DWS, but having to bring in an additional, I want to say it was 14, 15 staff, was the benefit in regards to partnering with.
So if I could get the picture clearly, the $15 million that the feds gave, that was over about 4-year period. And with that, you were able to get the curricula aligned, the stack curriculum, all of that. That's been done. But you need to keep it going. I mean, none of that was going to pay for tuition or additional faculty.
Additional faculty, yes.
So you need some money for additional faculty and job coaches. That's basically, and then I guess a coordinator at each site to keep the focus, like you were saying, it tends to dissipate.
Exactly, and there's some consortium, so that there's some coordination that pulls the whole thing together among colleges, among the workforce systems. So.
And how much would it cost to do all 11 schools and maybe even add in city?
Well, let's see. I can tell you that what we have averaged is that per college, for a medium-sized college, so about approximately $100,000 per college for a medium-sized college, and that's right off.
Another 300,000 for, let's say you add, and if you add
And that's
city
for 1 year.
And then you add city 400,000.
Yeah, and we had initially
So
tried.
it'd be about $2 million a year, roughly.
Yeah, I mean, we would have to break
We
it.
don't fund things for 4 years, so it would
Yeah.
be year to year.
Year to
It'd be 2 million,
Yes.
and then you take a chance that we could keep that going. We can't really commit.
Yeah, so like for year one for 8 colleges was about $1 million, just the legislative request, with leveraging expenses from both the partner colleges and DWS would come up to about $2 million per year, but that's for the 8 colleges. So if we were to double that, say 16, it would be, yeah, $2 million. So, and I mean, I initially loved the idea of having all the colleges involved because it just includes, to do 8 colleges versus all the colleges, but honestly, it would be almost just as easy to just do them all, but that does require funding resources, so.
Okay, well, I'm going to let members of the committee ask their questions, and Senator Stefanik, we'll start with you. We have Rodriguez and Anderson and Thompson.
We need.
You need a mic? It's on. No, leave that for us. Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we would start wrapping our head around the colleges plus SIPI, I would want to expand it further. I would really like to know how many other Native American community colleges, 2-year colleges there are that should be included, because this last year, Senator Betty Shendo and I was one of the co-sponsors, worked very hard to expand some of our scholarship money to Native American students in some of the Native American colleges. And while I understand this is a pathway, and it starts at a younger level, I was recently at a funeral out in Gallup where somebody approached me and said, "You are deleting and not paying attention to our students who are on a pathway in our charter high school here and getting ready to go on to college." And this was a Native American community that was speaking to me, and I don't represent that area, but they immediately went for it. And I agree with it basically. It's like, why would we set up some programs for students and not all students in all of the colleges? So how many Native American colleges would fit into this criteria as well?
Well, I have an initial thought. I mean, we did serve the UNM Gallup and San Juan Community College, were the colleges where we served, a significant number of Native American students. However, were there any Native American colleges involved? No. And should there be? Yes, there should be. So I could agree with you more.
Well, so my point, Mr. Chair, is that before we kind of land on an amount of money for a number of schools, that we become inclusive with the right number. And maybe we need to ask staff to find us the names and the numbers of the 2-year, it's specifically the 2-year colleges. That would be appropriate, correct? Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Then I'm making a request then for staff to get, to research that for us.
Maybe open a file and start. I would assume that Representative Thompson and Phil Fajardo, they're going to introduce it again. But we have to get a full picture of what the reality is. We have money in the state now. We were talking 3 years ago. The difference between 8 schools and 11 schools would be insurmountable. Now that's a rounding off error in our surface. So we might as well go for the whole thing.
And Mr. Chair, there might be somebody here who has that information.
Mr. Chair, our bill went to House Appropriations to die. As many of our bills.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christie.
You should try the Senate. We're a lot easier.
Yes. Mr. Chair, Senator, so Dene College, Navajo Tech, SIPI, as we've heard from, and IAIA.
The 4.
4.
And the 8 that were part of it, that wasn't total inclusive of all our community colleges, was it?
No, they had to apply, and as I understand it, it was actually a pretty rigorous process. So all were invited, as I understand it, but some just chose not to for whatever reason.
I just
have a question. IA has a nursing program?
That was going to be my question. Which ones have healthcare professions?
Because that's an art.
Members of the committee, I agree. I was speaking to how many native schools there were.
Oh,
So,
What could potentially happen is, I mean, I would be happy to break down specifically per college, depending on the size, the amount that would be allocated. And what we did in the second round, this won't work unless the presidents say, yes, we want to do this, and we will help lead it. And so we need to put it out to the colleges, and those who want to participate, that could be something we consider, is figure out who first wants to, and then secondly, how much that would cost, and look at that.
Well, I just said my point, Mr. Chair, is we're at that time where we should be inclusive, not exclusive. So I'm good. Thank you.
Next is Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you mentioned earlier, hi to the panel, thank you for being here. You mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman, that they should try the Senate and use some appropriations, which is finance, and I was going to immediately interject and say it's already been tried, but we can do it again. Let me just say that I know that Representative Thompson and Representative Fajardo have worked really hard at getting some funding, and I recall you came to me at the very end and stated that you really would like to see this, anything can be done in the Senate. I did submit, as you recall, an appropriation amendment to the House Bill 2 appropriations bill and trying to get some funding, but of course it got stuck there in the Finance Committee, especially being so late. But that being said, the reason I mention that is because I think what you're doing today is fabulous. I think that's one of the things that we need to do is build awareness on the success of this program. Many times when I try to talk about the funding and the need and the success and how many students are benefiting and so on, legislators didn't fully know what I was talking about. And it's because, not because they don't care, it's merely because they just haven't heard much about it. And so having these kinds of forums really helps. I'm happy that you're here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting them on the agenda. I think that we should proceed, and I agree with Senator Stefanis here, that we should continue to be inclusive. This thing about piecemealing programs that are so vitally important like these ones, it's just not a good idea. We all know that we get federal funding, and in this case, you got $15 million, I think it was, in federal funds already. The purpose for us accepting federal funds for programs like this is because we believe that it's a good program, number one. Number two is that we want to give it a chance to grow and so we can see success the way we are now. And then we weigh it at that time in order for us to proceed to include some funding or not include funding. Well, this is long overdue already, as we know, preaching to the choir, but we know that is here already for us to be able to prove the facts are there, the data is there, we know it's working, and there's no reason why we have to delay any more funding. This is the only program in the state, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that takes an individual from square one, beginner, all the way through the arduous process that we have to go through, the bureaucracy that we have. It's difficult enough for anyone to get through the bureaucracy from one end to the next. When you have somebody trying with 2 children, as you said, coming in, or never having a job before, or never having taken a course, then they finish through with your help and nothing, then they don't know where to go from there. That's when it gets dropped, and people fall through the cracks, and we don't get things done. So carrying a person from one end to the next until we see them launch them off to that success is really, really well. And so I really applaud you in the program for doing this, and I just appreciate it, and I'm here to support you in any way we can. Thank you very much.
Representative Anderson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just had 4 quick questions. First one is, I'm a little confused about 11, and then we're talking about 8. And so I look at the list of the 11 presented on page 1, and I'm thinking to myself, which 3 aren't on there? Which 3 are the 3 that won't be on the bill that passed? When did we go from 11 to 8?
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, that was, we were doing our due diligence as quickly as we could through the session. That was per the advice of the LFC, and David Abbey took some nice time with us saying that what we were going after was too big a bite to chew. And so he said, can you please consider going down, reducing that number. He had actually suggested 4, and we were too heartbroken to not do that. So we went 8, but the reason we did 8 was because when we sent out a notice to these schools saying, this is an opportunity, if you want on and want to do this, we need your commitment now so that your legislators are heard. So that's where we arrived at 8, and also budget-wise, we didn't want to say 11 and then shortchange them. So in order to produce a full and quality program that had already been produced, we had to kind of back into those numbers and end up with 8. The legislation itself did not identify and couldn't identify specifically which schools those were. And those schools might have changed from the session to this next round. So our intention is to include everyone and more. But it was more a practicality of legislative advice that actually, it did help us get a little bit further.
Thank you very much for that answer. It is a clear explanation of how we got to 8. I think as the process moves forward, I think to have a blind rule on the 8 may not be a winning concept. So go forward with that thought. The next question had to do with, in the next legislative session, can we consider this? Will it be germane, or maybe, Ms. Chairman, my question is, do you think this will be germane, or will it take a special message? It's an existing program.
It's sort of an existing. I think we could make a case for it, but we ought to try to get a gubernatorial message. That would help. It would also underline its importance for the LFC as they develop their budget. So I think that's a great question, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it does certainly seem, being new to third-term freshman, as I refer to myself, SunPath is a new entity, and it certainly seems to have quite a bit of success. I listened to some of the discussion, and it reminded me of a recent board meeting at UNM-Taos, that's Eastern New Mexico University Roswell campus, where some of the terminology was discussed, and I thought they probably aren't going to be one of the 3 when it goes from 11 to 3. But that is undisclosed at this point, but I do think it's going to become a disclosable event eventually. Last, Mr. Chairman, I wondered if there had been any presentation of SunPath this year to the Education Committee, and whether it was worthwhile to consider a very short SunPath joint session in the upcoming joint interim committee to tee it up that maybe both interim committees would try to go forward with the recommendation. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Thompson.
Mr. Chair, did you want me to answer the?
Yes, please.
Oh, Mr. Chair, Representative, we have requested to present to the Legislative Education Study Committee. They have said that yes, but we do not have a date yet for that. We did present to them at the end of the fall last year, so we do obviously have more updates for them, and your suggestions here we greatly appreciate. And actually tomorrow we are presenting to the Economic and Rural Development Committee, because this really does cross over into that sector also.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one quick one. Hi. And we'll keep working on this, but how do the students find you, or how do you find them?
Well, that's actually been one
one, when Krista was talking about some of the fragmentation that occurred after the grant sunsetted, one of the big losses from my perspective here at UNM-Taos was that each college had a SunPath site coordinator. And this person was responsible for doing outreach into the community, providing information about our programs, bringing students into each of our facilities, and talking to them about all of the services that would be provided for them. And so that's been one area that has really, I think, kind of fallen to the wayside as a result of the loss of funding for this program. Now we obviously have all of our admissions officers, student services within our colleges, but with the SunPath program, we really had targeted recruitment into the community. And that meant going out to various sites in the community, whether it was to the Pueblo, to health fairs, to local grocery stores, all of the places that we really thought we could reach our target population, which is people who maybe had never really thought about going to college before, had a fear of college. And so that's one thing that I think has really would benefit tremendously from funding for these programs. And also just, for me, the community colleges really, it takes a village to educate people in the community. And I know from my past experience working with the New Mexico Nursing Education Consortium, in our state, because we are so large geographically and small population-wise, these consortium efforts that really bring people together and give them a focus and goals are essential for creating sustainable systems in our state that help students achieve higher levels of education and get jobs. And so, to me, that is part of the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. And I think that continuing with the consortium model is really essential because we are isolated in our communities to a certain extent. And the things that we're doing, especially, the things with SunPath created these very, very robust community college, employer, workforce solutions teams that were able to really make something happen that was not able to occur without the support for the consortium. And certainly recruitment was a big part of it, recruiting students into just giving them information, letting them know we were here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to, it says it on this one pager, but that when we get this model perfected, then we can use it to grow our own teachers and for IT folks or for whatever shortage area we have, we can use this model to try and, healthcare is obviously going to be probably the big one for a long time.
But education being another area where there's a shortage that is critical.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Cedillo Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm new, and one of the things I learned last session was about junior money. Do you know what that is? Yes. Yeah, okay. Did you guys ask any of us for junior money? Because this is something I would have been interested in investing in.
Mr. Chair, Senator, we did look into that route. The difficulty with the junior money was the amount of money that we were looking for and trying to cobble together enough for even just one school, and then trying to get timing, timing and manpower, timing and person power to connect someone like yourself with another legislator to try and barter that. It's a rough system.
Each of the legislators, both the representatives and the senators, where one of the junior colleges is located, might have had an interest in supporting this. I see other benefits, and that is also, and so I just want to put that out there and maybe have that as your plan B, or as a backup strategy or something. And I don't know, I'm new to this, and junior money was new to me too. And I'm just thinking because of the budget, the current budget projections, it may be that we have junior money again.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I think that's an excellent idea, and now that we're having this opportunity to make more legislators aware of the program, it would certainly be a softer ask to use that money, or to request that junior money be used for that purpose. So this is a great idea. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have some little tiny questions. Because this sounds fabulous. I just have to compliment you on taking this federal grant and getting all of this done. But I'm always curious about outcomes. And so I was curious about how you calculated the ROI, the return on investment, because it says $1 investment produces an additional $2.22 in the New Mexico economy, and then created 68 jobs. These are the huge selling points, and how did you calculate them?
Mr. Chair, Senator, that was done by Weber, so I do have a full report by them that would explain that in a lot more detail than is above my pay grade to explain how those formulas work. But they themselves, in presenting this, I think were even surprised at that return on investment. And in their presentation, they did add that that's not counting the benefit to people getting access to care. That was just purely direct and jobs created just in the program itself as well. But I can certainly give you the full Weber report that will explain more of that.
I think that would be helpful. It would be helpful to develop like a 2-minute summary of how to calculate that, because that's going to be what you'll need both with the finance committees and the legislature. I can't give you advice on how to deal with the finance committees, but this might be something that a lot of people would be interested in investing. And then this is a picky point, but it bit us last year with raises. Does the money that you get, so when the universities get money, non-IG money, that's not calculated, like if we required a raise, or we gave a raise, and we thought we were giving a raise to everybody, and then because there were all these programs like this that were not funded by ING money, the money that we gave was not sufficient to give the kind of raise we wanted, which caused all kinds of problems. You probably read about them or whatever, but it was interesting to me, because I know with the soft money that you get, and ours would be soft money, if it's calculated right, that shouldn't be a problem. And so I'm just wondering if you guys calculated that into your budgets.
Thank you so much for the reminder. So for the SunPath grant, we absolutely did, and we calculated it exactly on target with the way the college calculated. So as they got raised, we got raised as well.
Excellent.
I will go back and make sure that if we move forward with this budget, that's calculated in as well. So thank you for the reminder. That is really important. So.
Yeah, it just struck me, because if it's done right, we shouldn't have a problem in the end.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm interested. I don't know whether we'll get junior money, but this is, like Representative Johnson said, this could be a model for the state that would really pay off.
Thank you, Senator. Just 10 legislators, each coming up with 150,000 can be unique. So it's a fallback. Don't mention that you're thinking of that when you talk to the LFC, though. That gives them an easy out. Representative Thompson, I wondered what the status is. Do we need to start a file, or you've got one started already?
No, I do not.
So we'll ask the staff to open a file and maybe do some of that additional research that might be needed. And we'll consider this for endorsement at our November meeting. But any other legislative groups you can get forward with this idea would be a great one. Did you have a comment?
I do have one comment. One thing to keep in mind, I don't know if you have any advice for us on this. As you can imagine, building a consortium like this, I was actively involved in building it. It's a tremendous challenge and very complicated and very involved and delicate, and it just requires a lot of intentional effort. So to have 1 year of guaranteed funding and nothing beyond that, it just doesn't make any sense to do it that way. I don't know if there's a way to guarantee funding for a certain number of years, because it's really hard to hire people into jobs and say, this might go away in 9 months. it just doesn't work.
The one thing that can be done is to have it be identified as recurring in the budget. That's no guarantee, but at least it gives you a little bit of a cushion. But we only budget for 1 year at a time.
Okay.
And then if it's recurring, then it could be in the next year's budget.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be reintroduced each year.
Gotcha.
That's
Okay.
one thing.
That would be important.
On that point,
It's on that slide.
there's a map there.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's coming
That's
back.
okay. Thank you. When you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, about the recurring part, yes, of course, it's important. But I was thinking that many times what happens is that you will, when you request recurring, you say, well, you can't do recurring because it's a commitment for future years, in addition to this year and so on. As a last resort, only last time would be to say, well, you know what, we'll take some non-recurring to do it this year, but we do need recurring also. So that way, hopefully, you'll get 75% recurring and 25% non-recurring if you have to. In other words, instead of losing it all, take what you can at the very end. But I agree, Senator Cheesy, it's recurring.
Well, and I do think it's fair to say in 3 or 4 years to do an assessment, and if it's not working, we don't want to continue funding it. I've seen that happen as well. And I think it's important to have that in there so that we have goals and we know there's pressure and accountability. Without that accountability and pressure, anything can happen, you know? And I mean, I'm not saying for me, just in general. And so I think, I don't know if there's a way to write that in, connected with the reoccurring funds. Because just to ask for money forever, like, that doesn't make any sense. But if you ask for reoccurring funds and have it be measured and accountable, yeah.
Yes, and also, in addition to that, once you see the word recurring in there and see some funds in there, whatever amount it would be, it's easier to add on to that because it becomes part of the base. So it's better than starting all over again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But I think in regard to your last point, Chris, it would be good to have a little bit of money set aside in the budget for evaluation, and then maybe include a sunset, 5-year sunset. If the evaluations are positive at the end of 5 years, it vanishes into thin air.
Mr. Chair, on that point, the dollars would flow to higher ed, or who would they go through?
Mr. Chair, Representative, we actually did initially approach the higher education department, and they have been, and so new administration, but as I understand it, they are still supportive of the SunPath program, but they didn't have the capacity to even manage that. So that's why the dollars would go to the organizing institution, which in this case would be Santa Fe Community College. So we did do our due diligence and check first, and they said, we aren't the best place for that. We support it. Have it go to the other institution.
And Mr. Chair, the reason I was asking that is when the money flows to a department, when we hear it in appropriations, for instance, there's a report card and they choose, three indicators so that we're continuing to look and see if things are, things are working the way that we want to, and hopefully make some changes if not. But if it's going to Santa Fe Community College, I'm not sure how that would work out.
Well, and I'm not sure, I hope to seek more clarity on that as well, because I know that our college is, what they don't want to do is see it as a Santa Fe Community College program, because it's not. It's a consortium program, and we're willing to be the fiscal agent in the lead. But so if it runs through the traditional RPSP process, it becomes in competition with our institutional priorities, and that's problematic. So we're not quite sure how to go about having it run through a completely separate process. And I know we have a couple folks in the audience that are here to speak on behalf of this as well, but one is our Dean of Health and Health Sciences at the Santa Fe Community College, and she's been very involved with NEMNEC, and how, I don't know how exactly they have done it, but it's there, that might be something, a model to look at, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything else, committee members? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Representative.
If I can introduce, Mr. Chairman, I had one quick follow-up last question.
Sure.
At one point in the presentation, I heard the word leverage, and we never heard it again. And my question is, with this federal grant that has expired, is there any leverage for the state of Mexico in this area going forward?
So for the federal government, no, those funds are gone, but we have written into the budget, it's based on our budget that we learned from under SunPath. Hopefully this is an improved version. It is written in a required leveraged expense on the part of this community college. So they would identify faculty that are teaching in those high demand industry sectors, and then the Department of Workforce Solutions would allocate funds from their budget to offset and leverage the expenses of the job development career coach. So that would be every partner college and the Department of Workforce Solutions would be leveraging, and it's actually written into this budget. So it's set very clearly up front. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that answer.
Well, thank you. You've given us a large piece of information to digest and to hopefully proceed with. So thank you all for your presentation. And thanks for the great results.
Thank you.
30, what did you say, 3,200 people placed for this? That's great. That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, and we're not accustomed to that, so I think we'll just sit around and wait. No, we'll go ahead. So, the last time I saw you, you weren't doctor, I don't think, but now you're doctor.
That's correct.
Well, good. Congratulations, Dr. Dominic Zerlo, Program Manager of DOH's Harm Reduction Program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also the committee for having me here today to present. My name again is Dr. Dominic Zerlo, and I'm here to represent the New Mexico Department of Health Hepatitis and Harm Reduction Program. And I believe you're all getting the PowerPoint slides just now. So you can skip actually to page 2. The first page just has all of my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. That's how you can. So what I'd like to start out with is understanding the need for harm reduction. We actually have multiple aspects of this program. There are 3 different programs that actually fall within hepatitis and harm reduction. One being adult viral hepatitis, the second being overdose prevention, especially with naloxone distribution, and the third being syringe services. And I'm going to mostly focus today upon the overdose prevention with naloxone and on syringe services. So on slide number 2, it explains a little bit about understanding the need with regard to infectious disease. In 1994 to 1997, there was a seroprevalence study that was conducted here in New Mexico. Seroprevalence means that we're looking to see how many individuals have a particular disease, whether they're positive, for example, for HIV or hepatitis C or hepatitis B in this case. And what we found was at that time, 1,003 of the individuals who were surveyed in that seroprevalence study, there were who injected substances, less than 0.5%, so less than 0.5%, were positive for HIV, which matched at the time the approximate positivity rate in the general population here in New Mexico. We found that there was a 61% positivity rate among hepatitis B and 82% for hepatitis C. And so these were some of the reasons why the legislature was actually approached initially to pass the Harm Reduction Act. And to give you an idea about how important this still is the fastest increase in hepatitis C acquisition right now in New Mexico is among individuals injecting substances who are under 30. And actually this year the data is showing us that we could push that up a little bit more, so we're really looking under 32, 33 age range. Now as far as overdose, between 2001 and 2011, New Mexico had the highest, oh, and I'm sorry, this is page 3 of the slides. New Mexico had the highest rate of unintentional opioid overdoses in the country. In 2016, we ranked 13th, and in 2017, we've now ranked 20th in the United States, but if we factor in the District of Columbia, we factor 21. Now, the one part about that is it sounds like we're getting much better with our overdose rates, and that our overdose rates are reducing by leaps and bounds, because if we went from number 1 to number 20 in the country, that sounds like a really great result. The problem with that is, while our overdose rates have actually declined slightly over these couple of years, the main reason we've changed in ranking is because other states and other locations have increased dramatically. Now the good news is that does tell us that what we're doing works. And I'll get into that in a little bit more. So if you turn to slide 4, one of the reasons on why syringe services and harm reduction is so important, especially with regard to hepatitis C, is, as I mentioned, our largest increases are really among those who are under the age of 30 who are injecting substances. However, in 1995, in the American Journal of Public Health, Dr. Dean Desjardins stated, we estimate that the use of syringe exchange would have led to a 61% reduction in hepatitis B and a 65% reduction in hepatitis C among local injection drug users. That was over 20 years ago. And so that was also a part of why we did and have done over the last 20 years what starts on page 5. So in 1997, our legislature, thank you again, enacted the Harm Reduction Act, which allowed for the distribution and collection of sterile injection equipment and syringes among individuals who injected substances. It took about a year for the implementation of the program, and it was implemented on February 2nd, 1998. So we are now into our 21st year of having legal services here in New Mexico. Just in FY18, there were over 12,000 unique codes, which each code represents an individual. There may be some duplicate. For example, if someone came in and actually gave a different set of answers to the questions to create the code. So we don't say specifically that they're unique individuals because we can't prove that, because we do this in an anonymous fashion. So the way we create the code is we ask for the first 2 letters of the first person's legal first name, first 2 letters of their mother's first name, and then the year of birth. But sometimes people still don't trust us when they first meet us, so they may give different answers to that. But we found that when we do spot checks with that rate is going to be very low. And so we're talking 50 to 100 people a year who may actually have duplicate codes because they're not providing answers due to trust issues. In fiscal year 18, there were over 45,000 individual syringe service sessions with these individuals. Now I can tell you we're still working on the data for FY19. It's not quite finished, but there once again were over 12,000 unique codes, so people who were being served, and there were over 45,000 syringe service sessions again. And syringes are collected through multiple means, because we know one of the biggest issues and one of the biggest questions that we get on a regular basis is, well, where do the syringes we distribute, what happens to them? And what we do is we collect syringes during those syringe sessions. We collect them through syringe collection drop boxes and also through community collection events that are done through our providers and local public health offices. So if you turn to page 6, the overdose prevention has a similar history with the program, but it's a little bit more complex. And in 2001, again, the legislature passed the statute. We became the first state in the United States to allow and enact legislation for individuals to be given naloxone who were not the individuals that would be using the naloxone themselves. And by that I mean, medications when they're prescribed are for the individual they're prescribed to. In this case with naloxone, we're going to prescribe it or we're going to give it to an individual, but they're not the ones who that medication will be used on. It's going to be someone else that they administer it to. And New Mexico became the first state in the country to allow that to happen. And we started doing a program where we involved educating individuals who would use naloxone, which included individuals who inject substances, as well as the people around them in their lives. And when we say that, that could be anybody from a spouse, another family member, so siblings, parents, children. It could be anybody that lives around them, so neighbors, roommates, other people in the neighborhood, and anybody who might be connected to them in any way. So for example, if someone is going and getting treatment, then those treatment providers could also have naloxone. And naloxone is a medication which reverses opioid overdoses. And I know we've talked about that a lot over the years, but just in case, it's a very easy and simple device to use. I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a moment. Back at the beginning, the first couple of years of the overdose prevention program, we had a 3-hour-long curriculum. And part of that was because when this happened, and because we were the first to do it, we were navigating new waters. And people didn't understand how safe of a medication naloxone was. And there were concerns that different things would occur, such as somebody would take larger amounts of opiates than they would have before because they felt like they had a safeguard. And we found that that was not the case at all. So people would not do that. In fact, if someone's going to inject an opioid, they want to inject as little as they possibly can in order to become as high as they can and as safely as they can, because they don't want to waste their money. And that's the reality of that. So people weren't going to just go and use more opiates because they had naloxone. And we found that that was very true. What we also, the other issue is from the medical community, there was a lot of pushback initially because naloxone is listed and classified as a dangerous drug. And so they had concerns that people would go out and misuse this in some way or fashion. And we also found that that wasn't the case. The worst thing that happens if someone gives you too much naloxone and you're on an opiate is that for about 60 to 90 minutes, you're going to be hurting. So if someone gives you a massive dose of it, you're still going to be hurting for that 60 to 90 minutes. But naloxone wears off after 60 to 90 minutes. And so after that period of time, whatever opioids are still in your system will actually then start taking effect again. But that's enough time to get someone medical help. It's enough time for most of the opiates to wear off so that someone does not go back into an overdose situation. And so this gave the time, which was absolutely necessary in a life-saving situation, for that life to be able to be saved. And so over the first few years, as we looked into that, we provided this training and this 3-hour training. We then were able to show that we did not need to provide all the additional information that was in that 3-hour training, which included, by the way, discussing things such as what receptors in the brain naloxone actually activated and blocked and all sorts of things. But if someone's using an opioid, they don't need to know all of that. They don't need to know the biochemistry of how opioids affect the body. In fact, most of them quite often would get very glazed over because I was doing some of those trainings at the time, and I could see in their eyes that they were, we've had enough. I don't need to know more about the kappa receptor in the brain. So we proposed and were able to be successful in reducing that curriculum down to a 15 to 20 minute curriculum that we could teach and educate people about what signs and symptoms of an overdose are. We could teach them how to call 911, because believe it or not, a lot of people would be afraid to call, and so we would talk about, this is what we want you to do. We want you to call 911, even if you give someone naloxone. We were able to talk about rescue breathing, in case that individual had stopped breathing due to the amount of opioids that they had used. And then teach them how to use naloxone. We also teach them some of the myths about how people would try to reverse overdoses. I'm sure many of you have seen in the movies where they do things like inject somebody with a big syringe in the chest. That actually doesn't work for an opioid. That in that particular movie, and I won't name the movie itself, but what they were doing is injecting adrenaline, which for an opioid would actually not help at all in that kind of a situation. And so we would actually go ahead and explain why these myths don't work, because people actually, by following some of these myths, could have the potential to harm someone further. And the name of the program is harm reduction. So we wanted to teach them and make sure that they understood, here is a better way of how to help save somebody's life. And that worked tremendously well. But the device at that time was still a device where, and we were just transitioning from an injectable device for the naloxone to one where you had to assemble it. They came in 3 parts, which had an atomizer so that you could administer it nasally. And then it had a syringe barrel with no needle, because the atomizer would get attached to the end, and then a medication vial that had to be screwed in to the back of the syringe vial. And so what, of course, would end up happening is people would fumble with it. So a lot of our training actually had to do with people turning around and putting that device together. And so we spent a lot of time on that training. But we discovered we were able to train a lot more people, and instead of doing a 3-hour training where we need to do it indoors, because can you imagine being in Doña Ana County in June or July or even August and trying to teach someone for 3 hours sitting in a park or sitting on the side of a road rather than inside of the building? Or, let's imagine here in Taos, in the middle of winter, trying to teach that same class for 3 hours. With doing a 15 to 20-minute class on it, we were able to bring that training to the people who really needed it the most. We can conduct that training on street corners, we can do it under bridges, we can also do it in classrooms and in other facilities. This made it quick, accessible, and something that people not only could do, but wanted to do. Because the other side is, how many times have you had someone say, we have a 3-hour meeting coming up, and what's your own personal reaction to it? Now imagine we're going to do that with, I'm going to teach you now all how to use naloxone and reverse an overdose education, an overdose, in case you come across one. How many of you want to sit here and do that for 3 hours? And now I'm going to tell you, we're going to do that for 15 minutes. Much better response, people were happy to do it, and we had a lot more people trained during that time frame. By the way, in the first couple of years, we only trained a couple hundred people overall in those first 3 to 4 years. In 2016, we actually worked and developed, and again, this is something thanks to the legislature, that we actually had a new legislation passed that allowed the distribution of naloxone through standing orders. Prior to that, in 2016, we were only able to do it through licensed providers and some contract nurses, through Department of Health facilities, and some community contract partners. That also limited what we could do and how many people we could train. Once that legislation in 2016, which by the way, I have to say, I have to thank the legislature so much for it. The day that that passed and I was able to be present for it, I went out and I was so happy on the roundhouse steps, I just shouted for joy. Because I already knew what would happen. At that point, we were able to train about 1,300 to 1,400 people a year. We had started pushing for it, and that last year before it, we trained about 3,000 people. The very next year, we trained over 5,000 people. And then this last year, just to let you know, in FY19, through the Department of Health alone and our community partners, there were over 11,000 educational sessions with naloxone distribution. And to let you know, we're now not the only program and location doing it, because naloxone and overdose prevention is also distributed through HSD and DHSD. They're able to get some federal grants, and so they have been increasing that, and they're also training thousands of people in overdose prevention and providing them with naloxone. And that is all due and thanks to our legislative body and making sure that this legislation got passed. The other thing, and this is really the end result of it, in fiscal year 19, over 3,400 individuals reported to the New Mexico Department of Health hepatitis and harm reduction program. And these are individuals who are involved in syringe services, hepatitis services, and the overdose prevention, reported that they utilized naloxone successfully on an individual, and that at the end of that session, that person was okay. All of these changes throughout the last 18 years have actually become best practices throughout the United States. Our model has been replicated and duplicated in many other states, and we're quite often called upon, not only by different states, but also the federal government, to actually present and show what our curriculum and our training is, because we've had such success with it. And part of the reason we've been able to have that, if you turn to slide 7, it's not just about having that 15 to 20-minute curriculum. It's also ensuring that that curriculum is delivered in a consistent manner. And so what we started, and this again is a longer process than just saying, hey, here's a training, we'd like you all to come and take this training. We started back in 2008 where we created a comprehensive hepatitis and harm reduction specialist training. And then in 2009, we started having so many classes that were being requested that I could no longer do those trainings myself. I was traveling all over the state to do these trainings. We actually started an integrated training of the trainer program. And we started that in 2009. We incorporated the adult viral hepatitis program more fully with the harm reduction program in 2012. And we ensure that as many individuals as possible are trained both in our specialist certification and also in HIV and HCV rapid test certification. One of the other things that we do for this in order to attract people, because we know many times we have to have incentives in order to get people to come and participate in trainings, is we also are able to offer continuing education credits. And we're able to do that through the New Mexico AIDS Education and Training Center, which is a part of UNM. And so there actually are trainings that we provide are actually a part of the UNM Grand Rounds. And so for the one-day trainings, like the specialist certification, individuals can get up to 6.5 hours of free CME, so continuing medical education credits, or CEUs if they have other licensure, such as social work, counseling therapists, community health workers. And for the 3-day trainings, such as our, which is both our training of the trainer and the HIV and HCV counseling and testing training, during those trainings they can receive up to 19.5 hours. In addition to these trainings, if you turn to page 8, when we talk about trying to have and provide comprehensive and integrated services, we have over 50 locations throughout the state that provide syringe services, overdose prevention, and hepatitis services. And those programs, most of them through the harm reduction program, are through the public health offices. But we also have 17 different contract providers, our community partners, 15 of which focus on syringe service, overdose prevention, and hepatitis services. One which focuses on law enforcement education, because we have a lot of law enforcement officers who need to have information about overdose prevention. What are the potential chances of needle sticks? How to do things in a safe manner. And so they work with the Law Enforcement Academy and with local police officers, as well as with the different departments, law enforcement departments throughout the state. And then Project ECHO is, of course, one of our contractors which focuses on telehealth, especially with regard to hepatitis C. And whenever possible, the different locations throughout the state also integrate other services. And depending upon the particular agency or organization, they may be able to do some or all of the other services that I have listed at the bottom of that slide. Quite often they include things like food bags, housing, or helping to navigate individuals into housing. And one of the most important ones is navigation into MAT, which is medicated assisted treatment. So programs such as buprenorphine or Suboxone, or also into methadone programs. And then they do navigate into any other kinds of program, treatment availability, and sometimes, especially because many of the individuals we work with are very low on the socioeconomic ladder, they're often doing things such as helping to just get their IDs, so their picture or state IDs, which in many locations are required to even get to be able to stay into an overnight shelter. And so they'll help them navigate in all of these other areas, because people can't start to address the issues around substance use that they may have without also being able to address the everyday issues of food, shelter, and that feeling of safety. And so if you go to slide 9, this is a lot of what harm reduction is about. It's not just about providing brand new syringes to individuals who are injecting. It's not just about collecting those syringes to make sure that they're safe disposal. It's not just about overdose prevention education with naloxone. It's not just about hepatitis. It's about meeting people where they are. This is why we reduced that training from 3 hours to 15 minutes, so we could meet people out on the street. It's about treating people as people. When people come in for services, the first thing that they get asked is something like, how are you today? Or how can we help you today? We want to use affirming language. You'll notice throughout this, I don't talk about junkies, I don't talk about individuals who are abusing substances. We use the language as much as possible that actually helps to affirm that individual. So you'll hear me talk about people who use substances. You'll hear me talk about people who inject. And we also know that mistakes happen. And especially having been doing this work for over 20 years. Sometimes, for example, I revert to language that 20 years ago we considered to be acceptable, and now we would say that's a little outdated. I still sometimes start to use it. And I learn from those mistakes and correct myself, because we're all human. And one of the biggest things on the navigation is, or on reducing barriers, is helping individuals navigate through other services. Many times people have said, when they're coming in for services, that they don't want to get other health services because they feel like they've been treated poorly. They don't want to go and start working on additional educational services for themselves because they feel like they're going to be looked down upon. And so much of what the program is about, and all of those 45,000 plus sessions that our providers throughout the state engage in, all of those are about trying to help people feel better about themselves, feel like they can be able to do things that they've been told through much of their lives that they can't do. That's the real value that we see with the harm reduction services. And just to give you an idea about what the federal government says about them, if you turn to page 10, this is actually a very recent infographic from the CDC. And what it does is it actually shows some of the things that syringe services do in the community. And one of the big questions we always get asked is about how do we help people get into treatment services? And to give you an idea of how effective syringe services are, is that third little bubble that has the caduceus on it, actually states underneath it, users of syringe service providers were 3 times more likely to stop injecting drugs. And if you look at some of the other issues here, it talks about law enforcement, it talks about health issues. All of these are the reasons why we continue to do syringe services. And what I would really like to say is this has been not just the work that I've done over the last 20 plus years, this has been one of my passions for longer than 20 years. This is the kind of work that I can say with my head held high and very proudly, not only am I able to turn around and enable people, because what we enable people to do is we enable people to have better lives. We enable people to feel better about themselves. We enable people to access health care. We enable people to be productive. So when people turn around in other public meetings sometimes and say, well, you're just enabling people, my response is, I am enabling them. And I really have to thank the legislative body as a whole, and our previous governors and current governor, because without the laws that have been passed and signed into effect, we would not be able to do what we do. We would not be leaders in the United States in the area of harm reduction and in overdose prevention and in hepatitis C elimination. And these are things that we are doing. These are things we're going to continue moving forward on, and we could not do it without your help and support. So I want to thank all of you for allowing me and enabling me to be an enabler. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Members of the committee, questions? Yes, Senate Representative Ferrari. Thompson?
Oh, yes, it's coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Doctor. I appreciate everything that you were bringing up. Our recent legislation, from my understanding, is that we have the standing orders for naloxone. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Representative, that is correct indeed. So we have standing orders, and the way the standing orders work is any licensed provider can issue a standing order for anybody to distribute naloxone and to provide the education.
Okay. With that said, I received information from University of Pennsylvania and Melissa Ostroff about how our next steps, well, she was just mentioning that their studies saying that giving direct authority to pharmacists to prescribe naloxone is more effective at reducing overdose deaths rather than state standing orders. Do you think this would be our next step then, to make sure that, you know, a pharmacist can, as they're giving a prescription for opioids, that they would suggest and be able to do it right then to the person who's getting them?
Mr. Chair, Representative, we actually already have a standing order that was actually signed by Dr. Mike Landon, allowing pharmacies to do that. But also under current pharmacy statutes, the pharmacists can actually do that even without that standing order. They can provide naloxone to an individual that they feel needs to have naloxone.
Okay, and then they're saying that the next step after that is to have it just over the counter.
Mr. Chair and Representative, over the counter is, that would be a way to get naloxone out onto the shelves and into public consciousness a little bit more. The issue when you turn it over the counter is that you no longer have insurance or Medicaid paying for it. Currently, under the Medicaid rules, naloxone is paid for with zero copay, and many of the insurance companies will actually pay for it with just your normal copays for pharmaceuticals. The cost for naloxone, without having those copays, if you were to purchase retail, is approximately $140 for 2 doses. And then the copays range anywhere, depending on the insurance company, between about $10 and $35. Now we have had, because you may have heard this as well, where constituents may turn around and say they're being charged $85 or $100 for naloxone. The problem there is what's actually happening is they're getting charged their copay and their deductible because they may not have used their pharmaceutical deductible previously.
Okay. And Mr. Chair and Dr. Also, this study was showing that targeting the high-risk users and also their social network, is that who your training is targeting or going for?
Mr. Chair, Representative, that's exactly who we target. That's exactly what we do, and it's part of why we have so much success, including in the reporting of the overdoses, or the successful reversals of overdoses. Even when we look at some of the data statewide, our rates of it, if you look at that, we have about 30% from quarter to quarter. So 11,000 people trained last year and 3,400 reversals. When you look at that in other parts of the country, their rates of even the reporting are much lower. And part of that is because not only are we working to make sure that the individuals who are at high risk for opioid overdose and the people around them, because those social circles are really what's most important, because they're the individuals who are going to be using and administering naloxone to whoever overdosed. We make sure that we're able to do that as much as we possibly can, and we are constantly looking at our program and our curricula, looking to see what gaps we have throughout the state as far as service delivery to ensure that we can improve that. And so, yes, that's exactly what we do and will continue to do.
And Mr. Chair and Dr., I think reducing a training from 3 hours down to, minutes is just remarkable, and I think proves the success of, this program in New Mexico. But also, I wanted to appreciate what you were saying about stigma and awareness. I recently saw a commercial that was touting, how this treatment was going to be really important, and that all these things they needed to have as a cure. And then the end of the commercial, you find out it was about stigma, how we need to cure stigma. And if there were, this is what it would look like. So treatment for stigma is something we need to come up with, right? So thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all, Mr. Chair.
Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for all the work that you are doing. These are people who frequently no one wants to look at or hear about or whatever. But, you know, I think that, and then I realized my father-in-law, who was born with no legs and walked on his hands for his whole life, as he got older, had horrible shoulder pain because his shoulders acted like hips, and he became addicted to pain pills and thank God for the naloxone. I will say that much. But so I want to really thank you. And then I'm not sure what you talked about the Hep C, and I know that we as a state government are paying a lot of money for treatment for Hep C for incarcerated individuals. Do you know what I know it's come down a lot, but what a course of treatment for Hep C costs these days?
Mr. Chair, Representative, right now it really varies a little bit, quite a bit, based on which type of treatment. Because there's many medications at this point now that help with the cure of hepatitis C. But right now we're really looking at about somewhere between $15,000 to $18,000 for that. And while that sounds like a lot of money, by the way, for an 8 to 12 week course of medication, that's 1 pill a day. And while I know at face value that sounds like a lot of money, if you look at how much a transplant costs, don't forget about all the doctor visits, everything else. Just the transplants, you're talking over $250,000 each. And that's if you can actually have a transplant. And so the issue here is in the long run, while this is at that price range, and by the way, that is since 2013, when the first curative medication was released, the price tag was over $82,000. So we hope to continue to see that price reduce because, of course, we would like to spend less money on it than is necessary. But right now, it's in that range.
And Mr. Chair, the reason I ask that is just the return on investment. We can spend a couple $100 on syringes for a person's lifetime and save that, $20,000 that we may have to end up paying for treatment for Hep C. There was an article in the Albuquerque Journal recently that talking about homeless populations, and I can't remember. I think the article said that 40% of homeless people are HIV positive and 60% have Hep C. Do those numbers sound correct?
Mr. Chair, Representative, definitely not as far as the HIV rates. Again, we see among individuals who inject these, those HIV rates are still under 0.5%. As far as individuals who are experiencing homelessness, they're 4 times more likely to become HIV positive, if I remember my statistic correct. And as far as hepatitis C, again, I couldn't tell you exactly as far as individuals experiencing homelessness, but we do know that among individuals who are injecting, it's very high. And so again, as I mentioned in the study that was done back in the 90s, we were looking at an 82% positivity rate, and that's not dropped by very much at this point for a variety of reasons. A lot of that having to do with actual access, because until the last few years, as our programs for syringe service initially started, we still did not have enough as far as our services to be able to reach individuals so that every time they injected, they were not sharing syringes. And so we were still seeing rates of transmission. Now with the level the program is, after 20 years, we are now starting to see that coverage, where individuals who are injecting do not need to share, but it takes time to build it up.
Thank you for that. And then there's a woman, probably many of you have heard from her. I don't even know her name, which is a good thing, because she gets kind of belligerent and angry about that she says, syringe exchanges do not work. I work at the CDC and they do not work, and we need to do exchanges and not give them to people because the syringes. So just tell me what to say to a person like that.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I do know the constituent you're speaking of very well, actually. And I understand where their concerns are coming from. On the face value, it does not make sense of why would we distribute syringes and not ensure that we collect every single one of them back. And this really comes to the issue of stigma. For example, and I'd like you to imagine for a moment, You're somebody who is experiencing homelessness, living on the street, and you're injecting substances, and you have some syringes on you that you got from our local syringe service provider, and right down the block you see a law enforcement officer. It really does not matter what that law enforcement officer's opinion is, what their thoughts are. This has nothing to do with them even being a law enforcement officer, except the perception of that individual who feels that they've been either unduly harassed, that they've been persecuted and sometimes prosecuted, unfortunately, for doing what they need to do on a daily basis, which is oftentimes involves sleeping in public places, urinating in public bathrooms. Thinking about those things, what we would call quality of life crimes, whether correct to happen or not, that's not even what I'm here to talk about. But these things happen. So that person is now afraid, unfortunately, that someone who should be there, and very often is there to help them. But instead, what happens? What do you do with those syringes? Too often, unfortunately, in those cases, people discard them because they're afraid of being arrested. Our program actually writes quite a few paraphernalia letters, which are to the various judicial districts throughout the state, stating that the individual is actually enrolled in the program and it was legal for them to have those syringes. But on a regular basis, individuals are still stopped and their syringes taken away, even though they are doing it legally through the program. So people are afraid of that. The other issue is disposal, just in general. How many disposal locations are there throughout the state? Up until this last year, through our programs and a few exceptions like airports and some public buildings, there weren't locations for people to safely dispose of syringes. And so that's one of the focuses that we have in the program is we want to get all those syringes back. It's not always possible, especially due to stigma issues. And so that was actually one of the barriers to some of our participants coming in, because they would turn around and say, well, if I'm coming in, I have to tell you, I need 30 syringes until I see you next time. So I need to now lie to you. And as a treatment provider, as a person who's providing services to an individual, if we're forcing people to lie to us to get what they feel they need, we're not building a very good therapeutic relationship with them. And so by able to reduce some of those barriers, and in this situation, why we don't collect every single syringe we distribute, what we're able to do is build that relationship so that we do see that. We still collect more syringes than most other places in the country. But what do people who are injecting insulin do with their syringes for the most part? Most of the time they put them in a container, quite often not a container that's actually approved to be put into, and put into the trash. And what that does is that then means, and by the way, that's advocated by several municipalities because there's no other options for it. The city of Albuquerque just recently, last summer actually, we provided them, in addition to the public syringe collection boxes that we already operated through Department of Health at some of our public health offices and through some of our community providers, we provided them with 6 public syringe drop boxes that they put in parks. That program has been so successful for them, they're ordering more, which, by the way, was part of our hope and our idea in providing them to them. The County of Bernalillo has also placed 4 boxes in some of the county parks and has found that to be so successful that they actually just did a press conference the other day in order to tout how well that's been working. And they're going to continue doing these programs. And so what we would say is, we're not perfect. And what we're doing is we're trying to improve the safety for everybody involved.
Thank you so much. So just thinking about the drop boxes, is that something we should look at as a state, or do you feel that's more of a city-county issue? Or, I mean, every day in the paper, syringes were found somewhere, Lily Field, or by this school, or next door, and Green Neighbor, all those things, there's syringes. So in a perfect world, if the state had a lot of extra money, how would you approach that?
Mr. Chair, Representative, what I actually would recommend is that it be at all levels. We should really have collection boxes, and they don't have to be the large mailbox size that I'm talking about that are in some of the parks. There could be the smaller ones, such as the ones you see in doctor's offices, or that you see in airports and some other public buildings, where they're locked on the wall, they're secured onto the wall, for people to be able to dispose of their syringes. And that needs to be really at all levels. It shouldn't just be one. The biggest issue is not even providing the containers. The biggest barrier for that, and this is why it really should be at all levels of government, the biggest barrier is who's going to clean them, and then the disposal of them. And so that's why we try to do it as much as we possibly can. And in fact, for our community partners, we actually require that they have what I call a good neighbor policy, where that if people do find syringes within the vicinity of the program, they are able to be contacted and they'll go out and clean up those syringes. But these locations, even though we have over 50 throughout the state, as you mentioned, people live throughout the state, not just within a mile radius or so of these 50 locations. And so the issue is much broader, and no one entity can do it on its own. So this is really a collaborative effort, and I think what's happening in Albuquerque and Bernalillo County right now with that collaboration among the New Mexico Department of Health, the City of Albuquerque through their Parks and Recreation and Public Safety, and with the county through their Health and Human Services, I think that collaboration of all three levels of government doing this is what's going to end up being most successful in the long run.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions, Doctor. One on the whole syringe program. I think, okay, one question was, once they've been collected in these receptacles, I'm still unclear what happens next.
Mr. Chair, Representative, essentially what occurs, if, for example, it's at an actual syringe service, so we're in a face-to-face session, what would occur is we have the participant in the program puts their syringes into the biohazard containers. And those containers, once they're full, are sealed, fully sealed, and then they're transported to our biohazard containment rooms. And then we have, and depending on the location and their volume, we actually have contracted with a biohazardous waste company, which actually comes and picks them up to dispose of them through the various legal means that are allowed through the Department of Environment.
Thank you. And that biohazard pickup company is based where?
Mr. Chair and Representative, I don't know where their national base is, but it is a nationwide or through most of the nation company, and the name of it is Stericycle. They actually, for their disposal here that we provide, and one of the main reasons why we utilize them in particular is simply because they were the only ones at the time who could cover the entire state. There are some smaller companies that could do a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, but we really needed, with the large program that we had, we needed one company that could actually service the entire state.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Chairman, Doctor. But I still don't have this endpoint at which that needle no longer exists. How is that accomplished?
Mr. Chair, Representative, so what ends up happening is there's actually a couple of different ways that the needles can be destroyed. The main one is actually through burning them, so they actually subject them to a high heat. It's not actually as high of a heat as if, for example, you were trying to burn, because most people think about the metal for the needle tip. Most of the needle is plastic or rubber. There's only a small bit of needle, and it's actually a metal that will actually melt under a low temperature. I'm not quite sure of the exact degrees on it, but that's the majority of the syringes. That's what happens to them. However, some companies do also deposit them in medical waste landfills. And so that's another option for some companies in some locations. And that's often what happens just throughout the country, unfortunately.
Thank you very much for that answer. The last one is, who's paying the cost of this syringe disposal? Now we've collected them. Somebody has got to be paying somebody to come and get them and burn them up and repair them.
Mr. Chair, Representative, so any of the syringes that are collected through the New Mexico Department of Health Hepatitis and Harm Reduction Program which, by the way, we also have, it's the same contractor we use for our own medical waste from the public health offices. So when we give vaccinations or are doing any other medical services. And that payment actually comes out of the Department of Health funds, which, as you know, come through a wide range of sources, which can include state general funds, it can include federal grants, it can include revenue. So it comes out of a combination of those at different times.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Then my next question goes like this. When I look at the timeline and New Mexico moving from #1 in overdose deaths, unintentional overdose deaths, we led the country for a decade from 2001 to 2011. Then the only thing I hear, Mr. Chairman, is naloxone came along, and ever since then our ranking has plunged. 2016 we were 13, 2017 we were 20. We're waiting for 2018 number. Mr. Chairman and Doctor, my question is, what are we doing right, and why are so many other states not finding Saxville?
Mr. Chair and Representative, first of all, thank you for understanding that what we are doing is working, because that's something that we have been talking about for many years. I will say that really before about 2013 or 2014, I have to admit I always felt that I was on the defensive, because people would turn around and say, why are you just giving them naloxone? All you're going to do is let them overdose again and again. And we see that in news reports. So some of the issues, they really come down to stigma again, where in news reports in other parts of the country, you'll see comments from individuals saying, why would we give someone this medication when all they're going to do is go out and use again and overdose again? And now our 911 EMS services are being tied up on that. And my answer is, what's the cost of a life? For us, for naloxone, we actually get a public interest price, and, certainly, Mr. Chair, Representative.
I appreciate, Doctor, that answer and the clarity, but I want to go back. I'm still puzzled. Why is New Mexico doing such an outstanding job? And now 20 other states are doing a much worse job because they have replaced us. While we've moved down, they've moved up. And we're no longer lead the nation in this statistic, which we did for a decade earlier, 2001 to 2011. I don't understand, what do you think they're doing or not doing that we're doing?
Mr. Chair, Representative, they need to import our entire team that's working on this program, and then we can do the same thing there. It really comes down to, I mean, I'm joking about that a little bit, but it really comes down to having these kinds of long-term sustainable programs that do work toward getting these services so that they're accessible for those who are most at risk, getting these and bringing them to people who are on the street, getting these programs, making them so that they're not a 3-hour, but a 15-minute. By the way, I really should say, once you get used to doing the training, it really only takes about 6 or 7 minutes. The rest of the time is usually questions people have. And it's really being able to make sure that we're doing things in a way that's not just accessible geographically, but also cognitively. How can we ensure we can get this point across to people? And so, by doing that, by training our providers, having a standardized training, we're able to ensure that the same information is getting transmitted to those individuals. And on top of it, if I may, I think, because I have the other part. So the other side of it is that we have also been, in some ways, very lucky in New Mexico. In many other parts of the country, they have been hit with fentanyl and carfentanil and other analogs of fentanyl. Fentanyl is an extraordinarily powerful opioid, which, when injected, it can cause an overdose with just a few grams of the medication or the substance. We've been very lucky in New Mexico not to see very much of that at this point, and part of that actually has to do with the type of substances people tend to inject in New Mexico. In most of the places where you're seeing the high increases in fentanyl overdose deaths, which are lumped in with the opioid overdose deaths, it's a powdery substance. And so it's easy to mix in with other powders. And the heroin that's mostly available is something that we would call China white and is a powder. Here in New Mexico, we mostly see black tar heroin. And mixing fentanyl in that just doesn't work very well. And so we don't see that. We do see some fentanyl deaths. It's not very much. It's been a very slight rise. And the reason we see that actually is because you'll see news articles about there was so much seized at the border. Those are shipments that essentially we're just the highway where they're going other places. So sometimes we see some diversion from those, and we'll see a few overdose deaths. For example, a few years ago we saw a few in Ruidoso, and that when that was tracked, it seems those were diverted from a shipment that was actually going elsewhere in the country. So we've been very lucky in that regard. One of the things that we're doing in order, because I know the next question is going to be, well, what are we doing to try to ensure that we don't suddenly start jumping on that? One of the best things we can do is not just distribute naloxone, because one of the things that I do see in other parts of the United States is they sometimes just are giving out the naloxone. But the other piece, and what makes us different, and makes our program a best practice, is we will not allow the distribution of naloxone without the overdose prevention education piece. And that's what makes the difference, because we talk with people about safer use, how to not overdose, and then what to do in case of an overdose. We want to be the preventative side, not just response.
Thank you. And follow up on that point, I understand naloxone is $140 for 2 doses, so I assume you have to administer 2 doses of naloxone for an overdose of heroin. Can I ask this question? It seems to me, why aren't we doing this over the counter? Because the only person who would buy this naloxone over the counter is somebody who needs it or knows somebody who does. And they wouldn't spend $140 unless they needed it, but it must prevent a hospital visit for many thousands of dollars. So somewhere in here I'm thinking, boy, this is great stuff. We should make it readily available to anybody and train them for 6 minutes. A pharmacist can do that. Is all that correct?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Representative, so it is correct. The more distribution we can have out there, the more availability, the better. And the more options, the better. And that's a part of why with the 2016 statute, that's allowed for that, especially through the standing orders, because pharmacies can provide that. Community partners can provide that. It can be available through anybody who has a standing order from any licensed prescriber. They can provide it. And that's what we're seeing happening right now here in New Mexico, where many providers are having it. We have naloxone in schools now, which did not happen 2.5, 3 years ago. We have naloxone in community centers. We have law enforcement carrying naloxone. EMS, such as firefighters who previously wouldn't have carried it, who are now carrying it. The more we can have naloxone available, the better that will be. By the way, just to let you know also, is the company that actually creates the current version of naloxone that we utilize has a public interest price of, instead of the $140, any government or nonprofit agency that's not selling it to anyone else who can give it away, which is what we do with our participants, it's $75 box for the 2 doses. But most overdoses only require 1 dose of naloxone. The second is there just in case, or if you can't get to a pharmacy or to a provider who has it, and somebody overdoses a second time, you still want to have that second dose. So that's your back.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On that point, Mr.
On
Chair.
that point, Representative Ferrari.
Doctor, I've heard that some of the opioid overdoses have gotten so much stronger that they take at least 2 to 4 injections. Is that true, or what do you say about it?
Mr. Chair, Representative, so a lot of what happens when they're taking multiple doses is it's actually a fear factor. So what occurs is naloxone is not instantaneous. So once it's actually delivered or administered through the nostril, then it can take anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes to fully take effect. From a practical standpoint, most of the time we see people are reviving within approximately a minute to a minute and a half. But if you're in a life and death situation like that, 10 seconds feels like an awful long time. And so what we see happen sometimes is individuals will turn around and they'll give 1 dose of naloxone, and then they'll wait for about 10 seconds, and the person hasn't revived, they give a 2nd dose. Person hasn't revived yet, they give a 3rd dose, and so on. We've actually gotten reports of people saying they need 12 or 14 doses of naloxone, but from a bioavailability standpoint, what really happens, how much can actually be absorbed in the nostril? The dosage is 0.1 milliliter, and each nasal cavity, and by the way, when people are reporting this, they're saying they're doing it just on one side of the nose. And so what happens is, it will only absorb about 0.25 milliliters of fluid. So that means only 2.5 doses. So if they're using more than that on one side of the nose, one nostril, then they're actually just simply doing it out of fear. It's not having any other effect. But what will then happen, because of that time delay of naloxone taking effect, the rumors start to spread very quickly. The dope is really strong. You're going to need 4 or 5 doses of naloxone to revive someone. But the reality is when we then go in and train individuals in that community and revisit training with them and emphasize when you give naloxone, if they're still not breathing, use rescue breathing, which is a part of our training, and then wait for that 3 to 5 minutes. Breathe for them in that meantime. What we see then happen, we no longer have reports of multiple doses of naloxone being necessary.
So, Mr. Chair and Dr. Depp, training is really critical for people to understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did you say that your name was Dr. Enabler?
Mr. Chair, Representative, that's a new title, and I'll accept that one gladly.
That'd be a cool name to have. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I've sat on this committee through the course of this, I guess we could call paradigm shift regarding kind of the opioid crisis. And I want to say, Mr. Chair, that I think it's been the last 6-7 years where we've seen that, where we basically have seen New Mexico really take this opioid issue under their wing. There's not something over there that's going to be taken care of by them over there, and dealing with those over there. You know, it's our issue. You know, these folks, Mr. Chair, that are going through these substance abuse issues are our community, our family members, our relatives, our neighbors, friends, acquaintances, colleagues, you name it. You know, and it's not them. You know, they're part of our community, so naturally undertaking has to be kind of community-oriented, community-focused. But yeah, and I'm glad you did mention, Mr. Chair, part of that paradigm shift. You know, we're starting to see it now with physicians, primary care docs, pharmacists that 8 years ago would not have anything to do with naloxone. And primary care docs, Mr. Chair, wouldn't let, you know, people in their clinics to get this treatment, mainly because of the stigma. Them going into a clinic, you know, with moms and dads, little kids with a runny nose, or grandma and grandpa there with a busted hip. You know, you don't want to see a druggie go in and, you know, order naloxone. And I'm glad you touched on the fact, Mr. Chair, that we have also police officers, first responders. This was a big issue, I want to say, about 3 years ago, where it kind of early went viral. You know, even the conservative police departments, you know, jumped on board because they saw the value of it. And it's no fun, Mr. Chair. You know, kind of reading the local newspaper and, you know, Johnny so-and-so overdosed, or Mary so-and-so overdosed, or whoever overdosed, you know, and it's just not good overall. It's not good for the psyche to see that kind of news portrayed over and over again. And so I'm glad for that. You know, Mr. Chair, this training program, I think it's so important what you're doing. And Mr. Chair, I can equate what Dr. Nagler is doing to a program that Richard Rivas had in my community there in Atrisco. He started a community bicycle recycling program where he'd go around and collect these bikes. And he got the city to loan him an old library, and he made a workshop out of it. And he'd get some monies, and he'd have a workshop. He'd take these used bikes, refurbish them. New handlebars, new pedals, new chains, you know, and make them like new. And then, Mr. Chair, he would then take these bikes to a bike distribution at the local schools in low-income communities, mainly there in my district. That's where it started. And he'd have this little video, Mr. Chair, on bike safety that the kids would have to see, and the parents or the grandparents that were there for the kid to get the bike. And that was so holistic. You're getting a bike, but there's responsibility, Mr. Chair, with the bike. These are the things, and the video was so down to earth, just regular, everyday kind of language, not, you know, PhD to the fourth degree philosopher at UNM, you know, kind of doing the messaging. And that's so important. And I think what you're doing is real right on, especially limiting the time frame in terms of that video wasn't more than 5 minutes, you know, not 15 minutes. And and I have to say this, Mr. Chair, but after the video with Richard Rivas and the little kiddos, naturally it was a bike distribution, right? So before they had the video, before the kids would go into the auditorium or the gym, they had the bikes lined up nice and neat, you know, and the kids are there trying to scope them out and whatever. But you know how Dad and Mom are. You know how Grandma and Grandpa are. You know, they were kind of saying, Hito, get that one. Grandma and Grandpa say, Hito, get that one. Yeah. Well, what happened? After the video, Richard Rivas would say, okay, kids, you can go out into the parking lot and get your bike. And Mom and Dad, Grandma and Grandpa, you're going to stay here inside the gym. while your kid gets his bike. He's going to get his bike, not the one Dad wants, the one Mom wants, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Getting back to, that's the after effect of the educational program, right? And you don't have one like that yet. But Mr. Chair, you know, this syringe issue is kind of real significant. I brought up in the past. If there's a way, Mr. Chair, that we could, especially on the free syringe giveaways, free syringe distributions, if there's a way we could color code them, so we could see what amount of syringes that are part of the distribution program are ending up on the street, on the Little League fields. And I think that's good data for us to gather. And have some kind of color-coded structure to do that. I think it's important data. It gives us location, it gives us number, it just gives us a lot of things that we don't have right now. And it also, I think, is a matter of good practice, Mr. Chair, in terms of also giving the department, you know, some good data in terms of outreach, of focus, in terms of safe distribution, or safe drop-off of the syringes. And, the incident that came out this summer with the little girl sliding into second base and poking herself with a syringe. Naturally, the syringe was embedded in the soil, so there was no way for the child to see the syringe. That happened in my Little League. They're at a Frisco Valley Little League. That's where it happened. And I have to give credit to the board, Mr. Chair, mainly because for some years now, they on their volition have been going out before each game and cleaning out the fields. And there is that little area of my district where there are apparently some junkies. And for some reason, they like to hang out at that Little League when the lights are off and it's nice and quiet and nobody's around, and shoot up and just dispose of that syringe, whatever they're at, Mr. Chair, in that Little League field. And I think that, Mr. Chair, that incident of that little girl sliding into second base, poking herself with a needle, I think created a ripple effect, Mr. Chair, with Bernalillo County. And Bernalillo County, Mr. Chair, has funding through their behavioral health initiative where they're getting those receipts tax to deal with behavioral health issues. And I think this is part of what that behavioral health funding should really look at. But it takes an incident like this to kind of focus people. And the other good thing, Mr. Chair, that Bernalillo County is doing is they're starting a mapping application in terms of where these community groups, where these entities that are dealing with syringe pickups, where these syringes are located. And that's another piece of good data that we need. And because there are some places in the Albuquerque metro area where you've got hundreds of needles that are disposed of illegally, so to speak, without proper disposal, per day. That is a crisis in terms of that type of initiative that we need to kind of find solutions for. And but I want to thank you for kind of really moving this issue forward and trying to kind of really look at all kind of aspects of this issue, dealing with our opioid crisis and the issue with the syringe services, and the role of the community and the role of the state that we can play, and also kind of bringing kind of a medium kind of a clean field, kind of find a medium approach in terms of these issues with opioid addiction and the syringe disposal initiative. I'm kind of looking, Mr. Chair, at a different angle. I'm looking at introducing safe injection clinics for our drug addicts. And we've had some presentations in past years.
Well, we actually have one scheduled tomorrow morning.
Oh, super. And and I think this is part of this paradigm shift that we need to look at, because that would take one equation out of the crisis, where you don't have that drug addict shooting, with a contaminated syringe and having this trip, and then going out into the neighborhood, breaking into grandma's house to get whatever, jewelry or whatever, so that you can sell it out on the black market so you can get the money for another fix the next day. It takes, it's a good approach in terms of that element that that some of our communities are under fire on a daily basis, where we have that aspect of the substance abuse crisis kind of coming home, affecting everyday, Tom, Dick, and Harry, so to speak. And so, Mr. Chair, I applaud the efforts of Dr. Nagler, and I look forward to kind of other initiatives that we as a legislative body can contribute to and make our state a safer, healthier, and harmonious state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick, I had an incident of someone that told me that they cannot, the doctors cannot electronically or call in prescriptions for the naloxone. And I wondered if that's something you've heard before, or is there just possibly something wrong with this issue? This is a specific incident.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I have not heard that issue actually before at all, so that would be news to me. But that does sound like a situation that's on a local level, whether the local pharmacy is not able to do it. And it may be some pharmacies, while the availability of naloxone has increased dramatically in the last couple of years since the 2016 legislation, there are still some pharmacies that do not stock it. But now, where before it was only a few pharmacies that stocked it, now there's only a few that do not. But if it's a local pharmacy that does not have it in their medication list, that may be why they're not able to prescribe it directly, electronically at least.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the other thing is the woman didn't want the naloxone, so they told her that they would just keep that prescription in her file. So, okay, thank you, that's all.
Senator Stefanik.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just a comment. During the legislative session, we had a discussion about naloxone, and people were talking about how it was too expensive, et cetera. When I was on the county commission, we took the steps that all of our firefighters and all of our county sheriffs and deputies would carry naloxone with them. And as you indicated, there is a public government rate for purchasing. And so I think that this is something we could encourage our local governments that we represent or that we work with to consider getting involved. So my question is, can the Department of Health help facilitate those purchases or provide the information to these local governments?
Mr. Chair, Senator, we most certainly can help with the facilitation of it, especially as far as with how to actually purchase it directly from the manufacturer. We're at the public interest price. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but the public interest price is $75 for 2 doses, so almost half.
Right. Okay, so that's all I wanted to make a comment about. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I had just one quick question, and your comments have all been around the naloxone and the opioid issue regarding harm reduction. But your office oversees other harm reduction initiatives too, doesn't it? Do they have others besides opioid addiction?
Mr. Chair, it's really for us for the hepatitis and harm reduction program. It's around adult viral hepatitis and syringe service and overdose prevention. But that does include things, for example, some of the response to the recent hepatitis A outbreak that we had in Bernalillo County. So we were an integral part of that, along with our local public health offices and the ERD or the Emergency Response Division at Public Health, where we were providing vaccination clinics. But it really is around those specific 3 main areas.
The reason I ask is a couple of years ago in visiting healthcare for the homeless, I was given information about their sex workers initiatives and how they go out and try to educate sex workers, about disease prevention and personal safety, but also there's a newsletter that they publish for the sex workers in Albuquerque that identifies, they put out an issue I think every couple of weeks. Watch out for the guy driving the BMW with raccoon tail tied or foxtail tied to he can be very dangerous, or he likes to steal money from you, or different warnings like that. Does that come under yours, or is that purely their own initiative?
Mr. Chair, so some of those are actually programs that are either collaborative programs, including with some of the other Department of Health and some of the other programs within infectious disease, such as our HIV prevention or services. The particular one you're talking about with regard to commercial sex workers is actually a program that in my previous life, when I worked for a particular community organization you've already mentioned, that we actually started at that time. So that falls under their particular harm reduction program. However, the distribution of what's called the bad date list has actually been picked up by another local nonprofit, and their name has escaped me at the moment, but that works specifically with individuals who are doing commercial sex work. And so they pick that on up to take that on over, just because the vast array of services that were being offered. But quite often, these are the types of things we encourage programs to not just focus on the syringe service, overdose prevention, and hepatitis, but also what other needs are available. So at Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless, they also started an identification clinic, like I mentioned before. The Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico, which is one of our other partners, works with gender issues as well as doing identification clinics. They have medical services. So many of these fall within, not within harm reduction itself, but they're allied and associated issues, and many of our community partners have really led the way in providing those services to these populations.
Well, thank you. And the last question I have for you is, do you anticipate any legislative initiative, proposing any legislative initiatives that this committee ought to be aware of?
At this time, all of those legislative initiatives go through the Public Health Division, and so I know that there are some that are being considered at this time that may actually relate to what you'll be talking about tomorrow. So I'll let them speak on that.
Very good. Anybody else on the committee with any other comments or questions? Doctor, thank you very much for coming. Congratulations on the doctorate. It may not be recent, but I haven't seen you since you got it. So.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
And members, that concludes, I think, a very full day, and we're ending a little early, about a half hour early, which is a record for us. So we look. Oh, okay. You can leave your papers here if you want to. Don't leave purses or computers or use syringes or anything like that. So that concludes our business. We'll see you in the morning, 9 o'clock.
Well, we'll see everybody. Chris, can you leave stuff here?
Well, interesting day. Yeah? Good. Just a little ramblings from the upper table there. It went well, and we had a lot of good discussions. We worked well with Mike and supported each other. Yeah. What difference to set somebody right? Because, they gotta get the career phase, and they get some recommendation, and then they gotta get to the finance people, which is the real, we're the real people.
See you both.
See ya.
So I was going to ask, wasn't it in
You mean doing sex ed?
Yeah.
You know, we used to, my first job was I was male involvement for years. And I did sex ed for 4 years. And did training with trainers. A lot of that has really, I mean, family planning may have a little bit left in there, but I don't think that. And then there was a teen pregnancy program, which is no longer around. I'm not sure how much. I'm sure we probably do some. I'm sure like health educators out in their communities do, but they're not that much sex ed. They do more like the health council stuff. Yeah, it's in the, you know, it's supposed to be a state.
They're not doing it.
No, and the thing is, you know, you can do ineffective sex education all day. The couple days, puberty talk, and then the birth control talk and the absence, doesn't get anywhere. I mean, I studied it back then, and you have to have, you know, you have to have intense, you know, sustained programs that include, you know, self-esteem and communication skills and all that sort of stuff. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know much more than that. I mean, I think we don't have a lot of capacity. We would like to do it. We couldn't do it. We wouldn't have the capacity. We would have to like help